I mean, it's such a bizarre way to make a living when you think about it. It hurts, it lasts for life, you know, it could go wrong, I suppose. Sometimes it might do. And but people queue up for it. You know, it's fantastic. The whole thing just has fascinated me my whole life, you know. My first exposure, well, I was working as, my dad had one, but he was in the Navy and he wasn't very keen on it. He never spoke about it, and so I never really followed that line of investigation. But I remember being in the washroom, and a guy in the sink next to me was washing his hands, and he had on his forearm, he had a shaved area, and there was this mark, you know, the tattoo. I knew it was a tattoo, but I didn't really know anything about him. But I couldn't believe it because it was still scabby. It had only just been done, hence the bald patch, and it had some hell of scabs on it in those days. They did use a scab, not like nowadays. And so I just said, like, well, what happened there? He said, oh, I had a tattoo done on the bank holiday, you know. And I looked at it. And what fascinated me was where the scab was. It was very blurry. You couldn't see through the scab, but the bit that was healing up underneath was brand new and shiny and bright and colourful. And I was just absolutely amazed, you know. And I thought, I've got to get something like that. I've got to get one of those done. That just looks awesome. So that was the first time I really noticed tattoos, I think. Yeah, because there wasn't many about. You see them in the summer, but you never really spoke about them. But seeing this guy's half-healed tattoo was a turning point for me. The fact, no, I didn't look in that detail. I was just totally. I think I didn't think of anything else for a week after. You know, the fact of the blurriness and the complete newness of the healed part, you know, and of course it was shiny where the new skin is all shiny. Yeah, that was fantastic. That really got to me. Yeah, I was probably about 17 then, I think. Yeah, I was only an apprentice, so yeah, he would have been around the same, but a bit older than me. But the rules in those days were a little bit looser than now. If you went in, as long as you didn't go in your school uniform, I think you were okay, you know. My first tattoo was it was a swallow on my arm. Still looking quite good. £6.50, Fulham Broadway. I suppose that would have been 1980, so you could probably times that by about 10 now, maybe 5. So 30 quid nowadays money, but yeah, I couldn't believe it. It's fantastic. It didn't wash off, you know, it's just what I wanted.
Lifetime guarantee.
Yeah. And I say, it still looks quite good, but I would never have had it covered up because that's, you know, I think tattoos are your history, aren't they? Unless it was a really bad one, but fortunately, that's a good one. So Terry McLaren, it was in Fulham Broadway. The shop's still there, but it's under another name now. It was under an antique shop. Well, I didn't know I wanted to be a tattooist straight away because I was working in a factory, you know, doing an apprenticeship. So I still had a couple of years to go. But as I had more done, I had a homemade one on my arm, so that I'd done when I was a kid at school, and I wanted to get rid of that, so he covered that up for me. But then they were very good pictures, so, and his shop was fantastic, very clean. It was like a sauna, kind of with wooden, you know, tongue and groove all the way around, and nice and clean, nice smell. Like the sound of it all, you know, the machines. So I had about 3 or 4 done, and then I really got into the drawings. I loved the drawings. They're more like cartoons, you see, not like nowadays everyone wants photo realism, but they had an outline around them, so they were like a cartoon. Very bright colours, didn't have black and grey in them days at all, you know. That just wasn't the way they were done. So I designed one of my own tattoos. It was a snake, a cobra with a skull's head, which was quite, yeah, it was pretty advanced, I'd say, you know. But anyhow, the guy thought it was quite good. So I made the mistake of saying, yeah, I'd like to do this, you know, I want to be a tattooist. And then his whole mood changed. That was that. I wasn't allowed up there anymore. So, because they're very territorial tattooists in them days, you know. I mean, I was from Crawley and he was in Fulham, which is 50 miles, 40 miles. But no, it didn't make any difference. I wasn't welcome up there again. So I thought, all right, well, I still want to get tattooed. It did upset me, actually, because, you know, getting kicked out for no reason. I thought we would get... Yeah, you know, you build a little relationship up with your tattooist, don't you? And I was just very interested in what he had to say about everything. He had lots of old tattoos on him, and I remember he had a great big fish in here, carp, nice orange carp, and it just looked fantastic, you know, being that big. And because he had a sleeve, like, you didn't see sleeves unless it was on a tattooist. So I was quite fascinated by the bloke. But anyway, I got over that all right, but I started to go around different shops then, but there weren't many about. The next one was New Malden, so that was a good 10-15 miles from Fulham. Then you had one in Croydon, went there, he was good, Frosty. There was one in Brighton, but I didn't go down there. It wasn't quite, it was a peer tattooist, so he was only open summertime, and I think he was more interested in doing the quick turnaround, you know, what they call stamp collector ones now. So, and I'd heard he was a little bit vicious. So, but yeah, but the next guy I met in Cheam, I told him you know, we didn't have a history, so I just told him I was going to do tattooing, and he wasn't bothered at all. He was around about my age anyway, and he helped me get some equipment, some better equipment than what I had, so that was good. And it went up from there, so once you get a foot in the door. My first equipment I got from a place called Ultra Tattoo Supplies in Bradford, run by a guy called Ronnie Starr, 2 R's. And I remember, because when I decided I wanted to have a go, I remember seeing an advert in the motorcycle news or Backstreet Heroes, something like that, that I had. So I went through my loft and I eventually tracked this little square advert down, tattoo equipment for sale, and there was a phone number. So I phoned him up and told him, you know, I'd like a kit. They didn't sell kits, but he said he'd make you an up duck, you know, sport like that. So travelled up to Bradford. Boy, that was a journey. And bought this box of equipment. I didn't know what was what. He gave me the briefest of instructions, you know. But I did know a bit because I'd been going to the tattoo shop, so I had it running and everything. But I mean, you couldn't practice on anything. You could do something on yourself, but we used to use pig skin in those days. It's a bit barbaric now, but it did the job, you know. So I actually got to use my tattoo machine, which was fantastic, you know. It wasn't like a pen, it wasn't like drawing. People say it is, but it isn't. It's totally different, you know. But it was very basic stuff I was doing. It just writing my name, you know, I was just blown away. So yeah, but luckily I had a few friends at the time. Once you tell someone you're going to be a tattooist and do tattoos, volunteers flock to you. You know, it's unbelievable. You know, as long as you're going to do it for nothing. So I had plenty of volunteers, and we had some ups and downs. But you know, some of them I still know, and they've still got them. You know, and they wouldn't cover them for anything. You know, there's a terrible swallow on a guy, hasn't even got a beak left, because we did it after we came back from the pub, both drunk, and he's like, "Go on, do us a tattoo now." All right, then we're in my bed sit. So I did this swallow on his chest. Probably took me about 3 hours or something like that. Well, it was about that big, you know. And he crashed out on the floor like this, and I was on the bed. And in the morning, we woke up, he'd stuck to the carpet. So it had all carpet fluff on it. And so, yeah, it doesn't look very good now, but he loves it. You know, he wouldn't swap it for the world. Another guy's got just a little C for Colin that I did on his hand. Best tattoo he's got, he said, because it was his first one. Yeah. So, yeah, that was great. But just doing the tattoos that was it. It was just, like nothing I'd ever really done before. To me, it was fantastic, you know. No, I was very keen to, but art's such a difficult subject. You know, I like to try painting, but I mean, what do you paint? There's so much subjects. I didn't want to do trees and cats and, you know, landscapes. I tried drawing some comic stuff, but drawing's very difficult. So tattooing for me was great because you'd work from a transfer, you see, so all I had to do was copy it. So you make your transfer up of a heart or a swallow or eagle, you know, these nice things, stick it on the arm or wherever it's going, and you follow the lines and then you colour it in. So really it was ideal for me. So you didn't need an awful lot of skill in those days to start off, not like nowadays. I think it's a little bit more advanced, you know. Yeah, exactly. Tattoos weren't, you couldn't call them art. They'd like to have called them art, but you couldn't say you're an artist like a painter, you know, or a sculptor. You know, some of these Rembrandts and things, fantastic. But a tattoo artist would do a nice heart or a nice rose, and that would be the art, you know. But people weren't interested in having them as works of art. It was more of a macho thing, I think. The more tattoos you had, it was a bit of a armade, you know. Yeah, there's that. I mean, it hurts, doesn't it? So, I mean, if it didn't hurt, no one would have them. But there is the mystique. Until you've had one, you don't know what it feels like. So it's never as bad as you think. But people expect absolute agony. You know, I'm sure, you know, it varies on the artists. Some of them are heavy-handed, some are a lot lighter. But once you've broken the skin, then, yeah, there's going to be an amount of pain. But that's what makes the whole thing an adventure, you see. That's the draw of tattoos, you know. Even now, when I get them now, 40 years on, I still get excited and I'll still look at them, you know, and wow, you know, I had it done, sort of thing. So there's something about it, it's a magic. It's just nothing else. Yeah, the way I learnt was by having them done myself. No one would tell you anything. If I asked what colours do you use, or, you know, what's that thing on the floor you're putting your foot on, no, they wouldn't tell you anything. But the only way to learn was to watch. I mean, I watched everything he did, you know, go in there, spray bottle, right, you've got to get one of those, and you've got to get tissues, Vaseline, right. So I had to get tattooed to learn. I couldn't have done it. There was no YouTube, there was no magazines, there was nothing. There was only the other artists. The only way you could learn would be to be related to the tattooists. You know, if it was your dad or your uncle, they'd tell you because you're family. But if you weren't family, it was a bit like the fair, you know, or anything like that. They wouldn't tell you anything. But I did have guys that had given me a couple of addresses, but they didn't tell me anything that helped at all, you know. But I was spending money, so they didn't mind a bit of questions, I suppose. But I can't remember anything that actually helped me. Once you started going to the shows, that was good because you could watch people. See, you couldn't sit there and watch your mate have his tattoo done and watch him like a hawk, because the guy would be like, yeah, go sit down in the waiting room, because you had a waiting room, and then he'd be behind a partition or something like that. So they were very wary of people watching what they did, because there wasn't the work about like there is now, you see. So you might be taking customers away from them. So no help at all. So self-taught. I'm not sure, actually. I don't think they went back that far, but he must have learnt somewhere. So yeah, it could be. I know his brother tattooed as well. So yeah, maybe his father. Yeah, you might have to look that one up. But I can't say see, weren't interested in each other very much in those days. You didn't talk to other tattooists. Well, I actually started in Crawley, because I was living in Crawley at the time. I had the first tattoo shop in Crawley, 1980. That got in the local paper. That was quite good because it was quite an event. You know, the nearest one, Crawley, is in the middle. Then you've got Croydon, which is about 20 miles north. We've got Brighton, 20 odd miles south. That's how spaced they were in those days. And I can't remember the nearest one after that. it would have been east or west, but somewhere like Margate or something, you know, Bournemouth, Portsmouth, yeah. So there was nowhere around. So I started up in Crawley, and I worked there for a year or two. And then my brother, who was older than me, he wanted to get in on it as well. You know, he saw what I was doing, and he let me practice on him. And then he said, "Oh, I'd like to have a go," you know. So he went down to Brighton and opened up a little shop. And then when I finished with my shop in Crawley, I had to leave because the lease ran out of the guy who owned it. So I was closed down because, you know, the building was shut. So I went down to work with him. So that was my first go in Brighton, in his little shop in Duke's Arcade in Duke Street, which is not there anymore. It's a restaurant now, but it's behind Burger King. And that was all right, but it was an arcade, you know, it was like a little market. There was lots of them in Brighton, and you'd have stalls, you know, and we had a separate room out the back that we could shut and lock. It wasn't actually a stall, but it was a separate room that was a tattoo shop. Didn't have a name, it was just tattoo studio. And so that was the first thing in Brighton, but there was just us and the guy on the pier, yeah, Bob Bonwick. So he'd been there a while, but so mainly on the pier. He only had one leg, bless him. He was quite a character, and he liked to drink as well. But come summertime, you know, there were queues outside his shop on the pier. So he used to have a hole in the floor of his shop, and he'd put all his tissues, throw them out the hole, and then he'd be fishing out of the hole in the floor, and he'd have the line tied to his chair, and he'd be tattering away, and all of a sudden he'd go, "Oh, I've got a bite," and he'd put his stuff down, he'd pull in his line, and he'd see what the fish was. He'd get it off the hook. If it was a small one, he'd throw it back. If it was a bigger one, he'd put it in the bucket, and then he'd bait it all up again, drop it out, and then he'd pick up and get on tattooing you. He was absolutely famous for that. Cigarette in his mouth. You'd have fag ash dropping on your tattoo now and again, and he'd rub it in. He goes, "It's all right, mate, it's sterile." In fag ash. I mean, the stories were nothing like you'd hear now. Amazing. But he did get told off in the end for throwing his tissues out of the floor because they were coming in with the tide, and people on the beach were like seeing all these rags of red ink, and they probably thought it was blood, and they'd be like shock horror. So he did get told off for that. But yeah, he was very famous for fishing while he was tattooing. Pretty small. You didn't. There were tattoo shops, like London had actual tattoo shops with a doorway, you know. But you try and get a room in a building somewhere. So this arcade, the market was ideal because it had all these little spaces. You didn't have to get planning permission in those days. You had to get passed by the health authority. But like the first shop I got, I needed change of use permission for change of use from, say, a shoe shop to a tattoo shop, you know. So there were ways of getting around it. Like nowadays, they're going to barber shop because you don't need to have change of use from the council, which is quite expensive now. So that's one way of getting around that. That's why you find a lot of the barbers shops have tattoos out the back, yeah. Or hairdressers, you know, or piercing shops. Yeah, the over 18, that was, I think, that 1963 that came about, something like that. Because I suppose people were gradually getting into tattoos. They didn't really care before. I suppose you could have got one at any age before that law, because it wasn't a mainstream thing, you know. So that was one of the first laws, was the over 18. And then you'd have your health regulations. But to be honest, I can't remember what they were, because you didn't have to change your needles. You had to keep clean and tidy, and you had to be clean and tidy in yourself. You know, you couldn't be sitting there with, you know, unwashed and that kind of thing. But I think really, yeah, the only one was the over 18 law, and they didn't want you doing anyone drunk, you know, and things like that. And they didn't really like it if you tattooed hands and the necks. So yeah, very, very slim stipulation at first, because it wasn't a very big thing, you know, like hardly anyone had them, probably a couple of % of the population really, you know. It would either be the military or crooks, you know, like criminals. Prisons tended to do them. So you didn't have your average office worker or anything like that with a tattoo, so they didn't think to make the legislations till later. Yeah, well, Brighton, it's usually had tattooists in military towns like Aldershot, Colchester, those kind of places. Wherever there was an army barracks, you'd have a tattoo shop, or Portsmouth for the ports, Plymouth. But Brighton, you see, didn't have any of that. But you did have the army barracks there, but it was the territorial army, so that didn't really count. I think it was just the summer tourists. So Blackpool would have tattoo shops, Brighton had tattoo shops. Bournemouth had one, Christchurch. So yeah, the people you'd get coming in your shop in Brighton would be holiday makers. You had your locals, but they'd be from all over the place. Yeah, they'd come down for the weekend or the day, so yeah, there wasn't many soldiers. You did do soldiers, but when they were on leave, not in the from the barracks, Yeah, I don't. I suppose it was really. Yeah. Just trying to think back all those years to how tattooing was looked at. It was more. It wasn't really a. It was more of a rebellious thing, I think, than something trendy. Because it didn't get very trendy. Because really, it'd get you sort of. It would be your thuggy kind. They weren't troublemakers, but they'd be the. More lads who were more daring, they'd be the pub lads who'd go out on the pub, and they'd show them off, they'd pull their sleeves up, The more you had, the harder you were. You'd start off with one on your forearm, then you'd have one on the other forearm, then you'd have, or one here and one here. But then as you got braver, you'd have one on the inside, which hurts a little bit more. So that was another mark of rank, And then eventually you might get one on the inside of here and here. It was very organised how you had them. Yeah. You didn't just put them like crooked here, that would be crooked, And if you were Mr. Hardman, you'd have your chest done, a big eagle across your chest. And that was it was almost like a badge of rank, if you like, But a sort of an unwritten code, it wouldn't naturally get you any more respect than you would normally, but people might think twice about pushing you out the way, if you had an eagle on your chest, because you weren't scared of a bit of pain, so because I think they did hurt a bit more in the old days. The needles were a bit more, they were a bit larger. Your outline would hurt a lot, but then the colouring in would go completely numb, but now you feel all of it because it's not quite as painful as it used to be, I don't think. So you feel the whole thing now, but I can remember some of mine that the outline hurt quite a bit, but the colouring was numb because the endorphins had completely knocked it out, which is quite nice. So, and you get your little endorphin rush afterwards, so all good. Yeah, I don't think that wasn't my way of having them done. I just liked the art and the fact that it didn't come off, but I didn't have my tattoos to be hard or anything like that. But I think that was the people who didn't have the tattoos that thought that of the people who did. Some people definitely did, they were, but they'd be walking around like that anyway with steroids or something, But there was a little bit of it's certainly not like that nowadays because people have such coverage, that in those days they'd have been like generals of rank, but I think that was the people, it might have been a certain jealousy involved. They'd see these people with tattoos, they couldn't have them themselves because work wouldn't let them or their parents wouldn't let them, so there'd be a bit of jealousy and it'd be like, oh, who's he think he is, having them done. But I don't think it was like that with most people, not with the people I used to tattoo anyway. Some of the best people I've met have had tattoos, they used to associate them with criminals and stuff, but you wouldn't be a very good criminal if you were covered in tattoos because they'd recognise you from anywhere, wouldn't they? Your best criminals. The Krays never had tattoos or people like that because they'd be easily to identify, wouldn't they? The bloke had a swallow in his hand or something. So, yeah, I don't think any of that's true. That's stigma, really. But you have to have that, don't you? A bit of mystery and mystique. I like that side of it. Yeah, I think so. With tattoos, I suppose people go for other things now. I don't know. I mean, you used to get skinheads come and have tattoos. They were very, any skinhead would have a tattoo. I mean, the skinheads was the 80s, so more so than bikers. Skinheads would have, they'd have lots of tattoos, and that just went with the culture of it, you know. I mean, you didn't do racist things, but you did things like bulldogs, which now are frowned upon, you know, which isn't a racist thing at all. But of course, you know, the way people look at things now, they think because you're a skinhead and you had a bulldog or a Union Jack, you know, it's racist. But I would never have done a racist tattoo. I never wrote anything like that. You'd get things like on the fingers they'd have ACAB, which is all coppers are bastards. So, you know, that could be racist, couldn't it? I mean, that was more of a laugh against the police, but I think that's the only kind of thing would have done that would have been a little bit controversial. But then it was just one of those things people had. If you didn't do it, they'd do it themselves with a pen and ink, you know, ABAC. Oh, hang on. Probably better if a tattooist did it. No, you'd get a cross on the forehead sometimes, but you weren't into doing facial tattoos because it would affect your job prospects, you see. Even didn't like doing hands much because that would affect your job prospects as well. It was a much different world in those days. Things like that. They used to typecast people, you know, they judge people, but now you're not allowed to, you know, you can have what you like. Yeah, that was a, a very basic rotary machine, which is the type that go round and round. Simplest thing, probably a Scalextric motor, literally, because it didn't last very long. There were coil machines about, but most of them used to have to make it themselves, you see, because you couldn't look in the yellow pages for tattoo suppliers, nothing about. So a lot of the tattooists, it would all be passed down, say, from family, and then you'd use Dad's machines, you know, what he made himself, you know, on the grapevine. He'd probably have learnt by having his tattoos done somewhere, or if he was lucky, the guy would have helped him and told him a little bit. But I mean, but people used to make their own machines in prison out of cassette motors and things like that, wind up alarm clocks, anything that would turn round or go round, then they tried to make a tattoo machine out of it. You can guarantee that. They do them by hand a lot, but it wasn't very popular over here because we did get into the use of the electricity. So, I mean, Thailand and places like that, you know, they use hand bamboo and things, but Japan. But no, the Western artists would all be using electric. So yeah, better in the end, but it was very unreliable, very, very low class, low tech stuff, you know. You were forever fiddling with them, but that was one way of learning how to make your own, you know. Yep, you had to make all your own needles. You could buy the needles, but you couldn't buy them assembled. So they were called bug pins, which I'm not sure what they'd have used that for. Maybe for putting the butterflies on the things, but I don't know. I used to buy them by the thousands, so I wouldn't have thought there'd be that many butterflies. Cabinets with butterflies in them, but I don't know. But obviously just the name. But yeah, fortunately I'd done on my apprenticeship, engineering apprenticeship, I'd done soldering, so that did help. But very difficult indeed. You'd weld them onto welding rods, and then you'd have to make your own eyelets and cut them to the right length and everything. Yeah, it was a good day's work doing your needles for the week, you know, so glad that's all gone now. Yeah. Oh yeah, I think so. Yeah, because anything like that, you have to put basically your heart and soul into it. You know, I mean, anyone can drive a car, but because the cars are there, aren't they? You know, if you had to make all your own vehicles, there'd be all thousands of different types, and it would only be people who could actually make things like that. You know, that's probably a bit of a poor comparison, but anything where you've got to actually do it from scratch is going to get the people who are really keen and are the ones that deserve to be there, I think, you know. Say for me, I was just absolutely fascinated, and once I get my teeth into something, you know, if I like it and want to do it, then I'm a bit of a pit bull. You know, very hard to stop me until I actually succeed at doing it, or at least find out I can't do it, you know. So Again, luckily for me, with the timing, was that era, you didn't have to be a superb artist. You know, you just, as long as you could follow an outline and do a decent copy and write nicely, you know, mum and dad, that's all you really had to do. People used to tattoo their own names on them. That's actually something that's disappeared. You'd have a dagger with a rose and a scroll, and then they'd have their own name written in it, you know, Dave or Danny, Bob. I don't think you do that now. You know, I don't think you do that at all. So it's that's one thing that's gone by the wayside. I don't know why that was, but well, I decided to go my own way because I didn't want to be in the arcade anymore, because, you know, it was all right, but we had to shut at like 5 o'clock, and I just wanted a proper tattoo shop, you know, with tattoo studio written above it and a window and everything like that. So he didn't want to, so I said, all right, well, I'm going to go and do my thing and you carry on doing yours. So I went to, a friend of mine had a barber shop by the Quadrant pub in Eyre Street, and he had a basement. So that was where the first incarnation of the Blue Dragon started. So I finally had my own shop. I didn't have a shop front, but it was a shop, you know, and I had a back entrance, so I could open whenever I liked and stay open till whenever. So that was great. Yeah, went downstairs. I had a waiting room with a video in it, you know, all the mod cons, and then there was the other room that was the tattoo room, so that was good. Room for me and my wife at the time. She was learning to be a tattooist, so that was good. Then when the council found out that he was subletting it to me, they didn't like that. So I had to move from there. They did offer me a place down on the Arches on the seafront, but I didn't fancy being right down on the seafront, you know, and I thought winter time it wouldn't be quite so good. So I ended up going to North Road. There was a guy there that had a tattoo shop, but hadn't done very well. He was selling the lease, so perfect for me. So I went in, I got the lease off him and started that one. But that was my own shop with a shop front and a door and everything, so that was good. Yeah, that was in North Road, bottom of North Road. Still a tattoo shop. It's called the Angelic Hill now, so, but that was the Blue Dragon at one time. Then I moved up the road because I was so far down the road. The guy Gary, who was on the pier after Bob Bonwick, Gary White, that's the one. He moved to Kensington Gardens, and he was just in a little room there. But the actual spot he was in was brilliant, because that's where everyone walks through the North Lanes. You know, they walk through Gardner Street, Kensington Gardens, Sydney Street. But they don't come down as far as I was. You know, we were still quite busy, but I used to look out the door when I wasn't busy, and I'd see people just walking past, you know, all day across, and his shop was right in Kensington Gardens, so everyone would be walking past it. So I thought, right, I've got to move up the road a bit, so I stopped my shop there, got another one up the road, another lease. So I had two shops for a while, which was a bit tricky because I had 2 sets of rent to pay, but I managed to, that's when I started getting staff in. So I had a couple of other guys working for me. One ran the bottom shop, and then I was up the top shop. And then eventually that finished, so that was all right. Saved me a lot of money rent-wise, but then the Hells Angels came in and took that one over, which scared me quite a bit. But it turned out that they were quite all right. You know, they weren't out to kick me out of town or anything, so that was quite a relief as soon as I'd just taken on another lease. So yeah, that was the last of my Blue Dragons, and that was about 98. Well, I like the Oriental stuff, the Japanese, so Blue Dragon just sounded perfect, really, you know. There was a pub called the Green Dragon, so I couldn't have that, which would have been quite nice. But yeah, Blue Dragon, it just had a nice ring to it, you know. I thought of different things, but they were all Japanese connected, because I love the Japanese style of tattooing, you know, the big sleeves, the Yakuza. There was a good film out at the time called The Yakuza, Robert Mitchum, and fantastic film. If you get to watch it, it's still about And they used the actual Yakuza guys, and they had these proper tattoos, bodysuits, fantastic. So I did like to try and tattoo Japanese style in those days when I could, Gradually managed to persuade people to to along those lines, but they still like the traditional stuff, But yeah, I just thought Blue Dragon was great, so I had that. And then I got the Red Dragon in Horsham, and I stuck with the Black Dragon in Hawley, so I was going to take over the world with different coloured dragons. That was just normal guys, really. Yeah, they liked it as well because it was very colourful. So just your average guy. Builders a lot, I suppose, were by then. Say that we didn't tattoo so many girls in those days. It didn't seem to be very popular. I'm sure they'd like to have had it, but people used to look down on girls with a tattoo for some reason, So it was mainly all sorts. It's being Brighton, I wasn't stuck being in a garrison town, so I'd get people from everywhere, so it was great. Yeah, all out of town as well, all along the coast. Worthing, used to get loads from Worthing, Lancing, because there was none in Worthing at the time. Now there is, of course. I used to get them come over from France, which was quite nice because there was no tattooists in like Dieppe or anywhere like that, Calais, so they'd get the ferry over and there was one guy, he couldn't speak a word of English and I couldn't speak French, but I managed to do him 2 sleeves and a back piece just by sign language, Diablo and things. But he was great. He'd get the ferry over, and him and a couple of his mates, they'd come in. So that would be the day full of Frenchmen. That was all pretty good. And then they'd go home, get the ferry back Newhaven, back to Dieppe. So yeah, it was great. I'd get Jersey. They didn't used to do it in Jersey. It wasn't allowed in Jersey for some reason in those days. So I'd get a few guys from Jersey fly into Shoreham Airport, and they'd come up and get tattooed. And of course they brought their friends and everything. So yeah, word used to spread. It was very popular. There is tattooists on Jersey now, but it did take quite a while. Jersey, I don't know, they don't like that sort of thing in Jersey, It's a bit of a tax haven and expensive or whatever, isn't it? So, yeah. But that was all good, word spreading like that. I actually went over to France, to Dieppe, to a friend's, an English guy had a cafe out there, and he said, why don't you come over and do a weekend of tattooing? So a couple of us went over, took our equipment over, went over on the ferry, had a great time, and he booked us all these guys in. We used the back room of his cafe, and we tattooed all weekend. It's fantastic, yeah. Just after Euro Disney opened, that was, so we went there for the first time as well. So yeah, that was good. Get to travel. That would be probably mid-80s then. So yeah, let me see. Now the first Blue Dragon, I went there about, that would have been 87-ish, yeah, about 87. I was about 2 years in Duke Street. And then, so from then on, so I had the bottom shop for about 5 years, and then the next shop up I had till 98. So it was, by then it was last century, so yeah, the late 90s. Still didn't have appointments then. It was first come, first serve, which was good because you know what you had coming for the day. You'd get to the shop and there'd always be a queue there. It'd be fantastic. You'd walk down from the car park and you'd see 3 or 4 people standing outside, and you're like, yes, I'm going to earn some money today. So that was all very exciting, because I'd go into work with nothing in my pocket. Oh shit, sorry about that.
Nothing in your pocket.
Not even a microphone. And because I knew I'd do one probably, but and I'd come home with some money in my pocket, so it's great. The whole freedom thing was brilliant. I didn't know whether I was going to earn anything. Some days you didn't earn a penny. I mean, it's such a bizarre way to make a living when you think about it. It hurts. It lasts for life. It could go wrong, I suppose. Sometimes it might do. And but people queue up for it. It's fantastic. The whole thing just has fascinated me my whole life. I've retired now, but I still think about it lots. I don't regret it, but retiring, but because it's all changed a bit now. You know, I had my time, but I do like talking about it like this, you know, to people who don't know about those old days, because that's a very, if it wasn't for those years, you know, and those kind of stuff we used to do, there wouldn't be tattooing now, and it would never die out because people just like tattoos, you know. Some people wouldn't even consider having a tattoo, but some people cover themselves from head to toe, you know, so, and you don't know who those people are going to be or what. So yeah, I did like the mystery, the sort of mystique of it in those days. You didn't know what you were doing, you know. You had the designs on the wall. It was all flash on the wall. There wasn't anything, they didn't bring their own things in really, very rarely. So they'd have to pick one of your designs. So if you drew all the designs, then people are having your designs. So that was a good thing, you know. He's actually walking around with one of my pictures on him forever, you know. So it was that kind of thing. It's such a draw. So you might do say a snake on one guy, then a girl would come to have a butterfly, then the next one would be a heart, someone else would have like a memorial tattoo, lots of things like death before dishonour and those kind of things, which are from the old days, the 50s. But it was never the same tattoo, so you just didn't know what you were going to do. It was brilliant. Didn't know who you were going to meet. You know, lots of my friendships have still survived years, many years. I'm now tattooing, well, I did tattoo second generation of them, you know, a guy, Dad would come in with him as a baby and then they'd come in for their first tattoo. Amazing, how cool is that, you know, 18 years on. And they'd both have one together. I've done granddads, you know, they'd all come in. Granddad would have their first tattoo, you know, at 70 or something like that, and the look on their face when they had it done, it was fantastic. Every day was great. You know, you get a cuddle, thank you so much, you know, but it was just drawing on them. So there's something about the tattoo that is, it's just, once you either love it or you hate it, but when you love it, it's forever. You know, if I woke up tomorrow and one were all gone, I'd go straight back out and have them put on again. Exactly the same. I'd have to. Well, everyone, yeah, you see, my tattoos were what I fancied at the time, so I can remember where I had them done. I used to go around a lot. Excuse me, I'd have to travel a lot because part of my learning part. So I can remember, you know, I got the fish here from Fulham, I got the roses from Croydon, I got my fish here from New Malden in Surrey, I got these girls' faces I got in Luton, some on my leg from Reading, so I know exactly where I was. Yeah, he was my hero, old Ian. Yeah, see, that's when you could start learning a little bit more about the tattooist, because there was a couple of publications came out. I was in the Tattoo Club of Great Britain, and they had a monthly publication called Tattoo Buzz, and it would be a black photocopied thing, black and white photocopy, you know, and there'd be some couple of pages of photos, and you know, Ian of Reading's work was stuff that really stood out to me. So I thought I've got to go and meet this guy and get a tattoo off him. I did actually meet him at the convention, and he did a piece on me then, and we became friends. And yeah, I used to go up and see him and have a couple of hours here and there. Go all the way out to Reading. You know, I used to have to travel, so I never got little things done. I always got a nice big piece, you know. So the guy in Luton, I went up there and had all my inside of my arm done, 4 hours, stayed the night, slept in the dog's bed, because it was like the mattress on the floor where the dog used to sleep, so I slept on that. We did have some alcoholic put you to sleep, you know, because I don't think I'd have slept otherwise. And then I went and the next morning I had the skulls done in here, but God dear me, yeah, I did remember that hurting, yeah, because I'd used all my endorphins up. But everything was an adventure, you know, it always was an adventure. Even going to your local tattooist, you'd be, you know, is he going to be there, or is he going to be full up? Are we going to be able to get done? It's not just like going shopping, you know, it's the whole adventure. I think it still must apply like that nowadays, but of course, you know, you're going to get it because you have to book up months in advance. You know, you'd wake up one morning and you'd say, "Oh, I want to go and get a tattoo today," so you'd race off to get there before the queue was too long, or you'd decide the night before in the pub, a couple of you know, and meet you tomorrow. So you'd pick them up early and you'd drive up to the tattooist, and again, you know, hope he's there. One time I went up, it was one of the ones in London, and we got there and it was locked, and oh no, but there was a sign on the door, next door in the pub, "Come and get me." So we went to the door, and we opened the door and looked in, and this guy, it wasn't busy because it was lunchtime, and the guy's gone, "Tattoos?" And he was like, "Yeah." He goes, "Won't be a minute." So downed his pint, you know, I got up, and we were like, "Oh, thank God for that, we're going to get our tattoo done." That would have been a guy, that was Barry Levain, yeah. Very famous guy he was. He'd sit and have a bottle of whiskey by the side. But you didn't care in those days. That was their character, you know. They all had their own character. You had Jock in King's Cross, great big Scottish guy with a beard like this, massive. Another guy who had a bottle of whiskey by the side of his table, you know. He'd have a whiskey tattoo. Barry Levain actually had an aeroplane, so I mean there was some money about it in those days. Rob Robinson, the guy in New Malden, he had a Rolls Royce. When I turned up at his place the first time, he had the bonnet up and he was changing the spark plugs or something in his flipping Rolls Royce. I thought, cool, this is all right. But, another time we went up to, where was it? Elephant and Castle, and it was, someone said it was quite a good place, so me and my friend went up there. And we looked in through the door, and there's all these skinheads in there, and I was a soul boy at the time, so I thought this is going to go down very well. But we were sort of looking and umming and ahhing, and they kept like looking round, you know, and you could see they were getting a bit aggravated. So one of the guys, he got up, he had this bit of paper in his hand, and he walked up to the window like this, and he stuck this bit of paper on with a sellotape, and it had "Go Away" written on it. So we didn't even get to go in the shop. So I think, well, that's when I went off to New Malden or something like that. Yeah, he just stuck it on the door. See, there was that fear of a tattoo shop, because, you know, looking like tattooists did, people didn't see people with sleeves and things, you know, they did look intimidating, put it that way, you know. I mean, they're all nice to talk to and everything, but, you know, when you've got to go in this strange shop and you've got the guys standing, usually a big bloke, quite old, covered in tattoos and that, you know, and you're just usually quite young. It was quite an intimidating thing, but of course exciting, you know. Once you got there and done it, you found out the guy was actually human and he wasn't going to eat you. No, I don't think they want to turn anyone away, but I don't know what the characters are like now so much. I'm sure you've got all sorts, but I think nowadays you've got a much more broader spectrum of people, you know. They don't look like the old tattoos used to look like, you know. But then, because a lot of the public now look like the old tattooists used to look like, so. But in those days, to have a sleeve was very straight, very different. I'd never seen a sleeve on anyone until I went to the tattooist. I was absolutely speechless. I thought it was brilliant, you know. Just looked fantastic. The way the skin holds the ink, you know, and the canvas that a skin is compared to paper, you know, I think fantastic. When you see these actual bodysuits at the conventions, you know, the proper people that are covered, it's better than any canvas, I think, because it's a living thing, you know. Well, nowadays, again, the artwork's totally different, you see. They're all into all this photorealistic stuff. Portraits. It first started with portraits, I think. That was quite popular. That was the first black and grey stuff that people used to do, and you'd see a lot of it at the conventions, you see, because you'd mingle more with other tattooists and you'd see what they were doing, and you'd think, oh, I'd like to have a go at that. You know, if I could have sat in my shop in Brighton the whole time and would have done my same thing for years, I suppose, if I hadn't have seen other type styles. But that's like anything, isn't it? You know. But I do like all that photo stuff. But I'd rather have my tattoos that I've got, you know, than some of the. I have got a couple of little portraits and things on me, but I like the traditional side of tattooing because that's how I remember it, you know. and say the pictures like the Norman Rockwell picture, you know, that's a fantastic piece of art. The humour of it, you know, it's a sailor. He's come back into port and he's getting a tattoo. He's got all these names up here that are all crossed out, and he's having the latest one put on, something like Mei Li or something. He's been out to Hong Kong or somewhere, so he's got his latest love tattooed on him. I think that just says it all. In the old days, you know, they didn't take it so seriously as they do now. You know, people are, it's all the, what's the word, what's the stuff, the black and grey, mandala stuff, you know, the dots. I mean, that's fantastic stuff, but it's not going to last. Some of these greys, you know, they're not going to last 20 years like some of the tattoos, you know, because you're going to lose a lot of the effect of that. You know, it'll be nice, but it'll just look like a pattern, really. But when they're first done, first year, 2 years, look lovely. And you've got to be quite pale skin to get all these delicate greys, you know. So I think they're making it a little bit more complicated because they're trying to outdo everybody else, you know. Not like they didn't really used to do that in the old days so much. They tried to be better than everyone, but they all did the similar designs, you know. So. Yeah, I don't know where it's going from here. It's not so good with photoshopping things as well, I don't think, where, you know, the magazines, fantastic publications, aren't they, Skin Deep and all that, the quality of the reproductions, but you see the tattoo in the flesh, they're not quite not quite like that, and I've seen that lots of times. Some of the show winners, you know, you go to even in the old days, the shows, you'd see them at the next year at the convention. They were totally different to what you'd seen in the magazine because they'd buff them all up a bit and enhance them, you know. So a little bit unfair to people to expect to get that when they go into a shop, and unfair to expect the artist to have to do it, you know, because they'd show you a picture from a magazine which looks photoshopped, and then when you do it, you could, there's some that can do it like that, but most people can't quite do it like that, and you might feel cheated, you know. You didn't used to get much of that. As long as you spelt mum right and dad right, and I think that was, they were quite happy. They had their mark, you know. That's what I came for. Saturday and the tattooists, you know. Oh, they were great. I haven't been to one for a long time, but for instance, the Tattoo Expo, that was a 2-day thing, Saturday and a Sunday, usually in September, because that's when the quiet time was for all the artists. So you'd have quite a few tattoo stalls. You'd have a trade room, but you couldn't go in there unless you were an artist. You had to have a different badge. You know, you couldn't just go in and buy tattoo equipment. That's another thing, actually. The suppliers, they wouldn't send you to your house, your equipment. You'd have to send it to the shop. If you didn't have a shop address, you couldn't buy tattoo equipment. So, you know, that was to try and limit people doing it, because it did go a bit wild where people were getting hold of stuff and turning out some right rubbish, you know. But yeah, the shows, you'd have like bands on, you'd have magicians, you'd have comedians, you know, and you could go around and watch tattoos. It was an absolute frenzy, you know. There'd be a lot of piercing around, and this is sort of the mid to late 80s, early 90s, and the piercing world, that's when the piercings started coming out in the late 80s, and some people would just go mad, you know. They'd have them everywhere, and so that went with the tattoo scene. So you weren't allowed to do piercings at a show, but you'd have the people with their piercings showing them off, you know, and stretchings and all that. So some absolutely bizarre stuff, you know. The more bizarre the better, because of course all the media liked all that, you know, the magazines and things. You get like the Guardian up there, the Observer, the Times, they all have their correspondent taking pictures of it and that, because it wasn't so common place. I remember Polly Toynbee from The Guardian, she came and asked me some questions at my booth. I mean, she went on to be quite a political editor or something like that, but she was just a normal reporter at the time. Yeah, that's great. I've still got the article somewhere. Polly Toynbee at the Tattoo Expo 91 or something like that. But it was all different, you see. It was all brand new and that. So yeah, but they were great, because you could actually see some of the stuff that people were doing. So it was really good. I think that was a good thing for it to happen, because that broadened everyone's horizons a bit. You know, like I say, you could have just sat doing seagulls and things. I did that a few times. There's Brighton Seagulls logo. But, you know, if I hadn't have gone to shows, I wouldn't have known what was going on. So you'd come back and you'd try and do it on some of your regulars, you know, because people would let you do what you like on them. You know, they want a sleeve and they'd say, right, I'd say, what do you want? Well, Japanese. Okay, well, would you want a fish, a dragon? Well, a dragon. So I'd just draw it on. It'd be upside down in biro, and I'd show him, how's that? He'd go, yeah. You wouldn't even know where the head was, probably. And they just trust you to do it. It's fantastic. So then I think, I want to try and do some tribal now, because that was another phase, the tribal stuff, you know, these big black lines and that. I enjoyed that, but a lot of people hated doing that because it was quite hard to get the black in solid, because people would pick it, you know, and abuse it a bit, so it wouldn't come out quite as dark as it was. But I enjoyed it, yeah. So I'd say, you know, do you want to do let's have some tribal there? Yeah, all right. And then by then they did get the magazines coming out, so they could see a little bit more of what was going on. So yeah, it gradually grew, so it was good.
Sort of more custom work comes in.
Yeah, because then they'd bring in a picture from a magazine, you see, and they'd show you that. So that was the original, can you do this? You know, now it's, can you do that with your phone? I mean, I don't think anyone would sell one off the wall anymore. You know, it just wouldn't happen. They'd come in from Pinterest or Google Images, you know. Shame, really, but I'd like it. I did like it being like that. But people say, oh, I don't want what everyone else has got. But we had like 10,000 designs in my shop at one time. Very rarely you do the same one twice, you know. There were popular ones, but I had about 500 dragons, you know, to choose from. So I think they got the wrong idea there, thinking that everyone had the same. Now they all have the same because they all want pocket watches and stars and things, you know. It's just repetitive. Owls, can you do this owl or this lion's head, you know. I think it's gone a little bit samey. Good quality, but yeah, a bit samey. Your tattoo is your one chance to be different. You know, I mean, we've all got, lots of people have got dark hair, lots of people have got blonde hair, you look similar. Some people have even got similar features, but with a tattoo, you can tattoo yourself, be completely the only person in the world with that style on you, you know. So why would you want something that someone else has got, really? Yeah, it's like when you go out and someone's got the same shirt on as you. You know, oh no. If you go to a show and you know someone's got exactly the same tattoo as you, then you're like, shit, I thought I was the only one who went through that and thought of that. So I've heard of people getting quite offended, you know, like threatening over it, like that's copywriting. You can't copyright a tattoo, but you know, that's my design and that was in the magazine as my work and you've copied it. So some of them get pretty upset. Oh, so understandably, I think. Yeah, well, I suppose, yeah, people realise that body fluids were, you know, you can cross infection and things like that, which is quite true. So, yeah, that would have been the next phase of the law. That's where the environmental health got involved because they deal with those kind of things, restaurants and anything to do with environmental health. So, yeah, we were told the first thing I think would have been that we had to change our needles. Oh, wear gloves, that was the first thing. She didn't wear gloves at first. I mean, that was the risk we were at the time, and that was pretty high. I mean, I used to wash my hands after every tattoo thoroughly, but you could never get the smell out of people's sweat. If you do one under there, it would stay with you all day. And I'd wash and scrub. And I used to bite my nails at the time. And, you know, there would be a bit of blood around because the needles were bigger in those days. And blood actually burns you when it's on you. There's a burning sensation, you know, when it's on your skin. Someone else's blood. I don't know if your own does that, but... yeah, so you had to wear gloves, and then you had to sterilise your needles. They didn't say you had to change them, but you had to sterilise them. So then that's when autoclaves came in, and an autoclave is something that will bring whatever's inside it above boiling point, 130 odd degrees, because hepatitis can survive boiling water. So it's not, people say, oh, it's all right, I boil my needles, you know, but that won't kill hepatitis. So, and the hepatitis bug apparently, or bacteria, can survive for 3-4 months on a surface. You know, it's indestructible, really. And like the AIDS virus dies instantly because it's like a fatty layer around it. So once it's dried out, it's dead. But hepatitis is far more hardy. So yeah, you've got to be very careful of that. I don't actually know of anyone who's got hepatitis through tattoos, but I know it's happened. I mean, it was banned in America, tattoo in certain parts. When I first went out to New York, it was illegal in New York. You couldn't tattoo the whole of New York State because someone had given someone, I asked the guy why, you know, why is it? He said, well, someone gave somebody hepatitis, and so, the Americans being American said, right, that's it. No one's doing it then. So they just stopped it. And it was the same in Massachusetts. You couldn't tattoo there. It's all legal now, but yeah, at the time, very, what's the word? They won't, you know, they're not having it. If something's wrong, then that's it. You're done, you know, you go to jail. But yeah, so we had to sterilise our needles. So I used to have a rack with test tubes in it, and my machines would be all set up. I'd have an outline machine and a colour machine, maybe a spare colour machine, and they'd be in the test tubes, which were full of methylated spirits, plus a bit of alcohol or anything I could think that would kill anything. You know, you wouldn't want to get near this stuff. And then, yeah, that seemed to work okay. And then eventually, I suppose that would have been turn of the century. They'd started to get really, you know, when like my flu jab at school, we just stood in line and they did it with the same needle down the whole class, you know. So in those days, hospitals didn't even have to change their needles. The dentist didn't change their dentist tools. But in line with all the hospitals and everything like that, they'd make you change everything. Anything that come into contact with the human skin, then that had to be thrown away. So. But they did realise, they were clever enough to realise that you don't have to quite scrub up like an operation, you know, where you have to change your clothes, your hair, because there isn't that enough body fluids like that. But you did have to, anything that was going to go into the skin had to be brand new, so, and unused, or at least sterilised from an autoclave. Yeah, it did make it more expensive and a bit more time consuming, I suppose, but good for peace of mind, really. The last thing you'd want is someone coming back saying you'd made the meal, you know, that would be terrible once they trusted you to do all that. I mean, say personally, and all the guys I knew, they did their best because they didn't want any complaints, you know. It wasn't like you'd cut corners because it would backfire on you, you know. So anything that I heard at the show that was, you know, you'd see people using, for instance, clipcord covers. So, all right, that's a good idea. So I'll go and use that, you know. Now it's all standard, but all these things gradually came in. So all very good. Cling film everywhere, you know, you didn't have all that at first, which, I mean, when you used to look back, the spray bottles, some of them would be brown, you know, where they might change the needles and things, but they'd had this spray bottle for weeks and it would be caked with God knows what, and because they'd have their gloves on as well, but of course this spray bottle, so then they put the plastic bag over the spray bottle and that, you know. So yeah, gradually things did get good, but yeah, I mean, I really think now the body fluids and also the healing time now, there's nothing, you know. Some of them they just go like sunburn, they peel, you know. You might get a little bit of scab, but what with the creams like the bepanthen and cocoa butter and all that, you don't even get a scab. So very, very small risk to the customers now, which is good. It's only because of the bore of the needles in the old days, you'd get a little bit more blood. You'd hear people say, yeah, I went in there and blood was running down his arm, you know, absolute rubbish. It wouldn't have happened like that, you know. It's just a build-up over a couple of hours. The tattooist would get it on his gloves. You'd never have it running down, you know. I don't think so anyway, I never saw that. What, if you want to be a tattooist?
Be a tattooist?
Well, get plenty of tattoos first, that's what I'd say. You can't be a tattooist without having tattoos. You know, you can't be an artist and specialise and be a tattooist. You've got to be a grassroots, do everything kind of person, I think. I mean, there are the specialists now, which is good because there's enough demand for their kind of work. But I think like a mechanic should be able to do every car, shouldn't he? You don't just, you know, you do get your BMW mechanics and that, but if you're a freelance mechanic, you've got to do every sort of car. So it's no good if you can just do Fords or something. You should be able to do everything, because then you'll meet a broader swathe of people. You know, you'll meet all types of people. You'll meet, you know, male, female, everybody. You can't just specialise in one thing, because I think you'll narrow your customer base down. You know, I mean, a tattooist should be a people person. You can't be one of these moody people, you know. I mean, we all have bad days, but when you walk in through that shop, you've got to be the happiest go-lucky guy. You know, you've got to be an inspiration to people, I think. You can't be sitting there miserable, you know. You're not the one in pain, it's your customer. You know. So, but it's a relationship like no other. You know, you get regulars in the pub, but you don't sit there next to them, you know, like you do as a tattoo. When I think of some of the sleeves I've done, I've sat hours with them holding their arm, you know, or sitting within 6 inches of them, you know, and we've talked about all sorts of things, you know. Their nerves make people talk, and they'll say they'll tell you things they wouldn't tell anybody. You know, it's the most interesting job. It's fantastic. I'm very much a people person. I did think, come after the summer, for instance, you'd be a bit worn out, you know, because you deal with so many people and things. I used to like to have a week away on my own somewhere in a cottage in the country, you know, do a bit of painting and that. But I was always glad to get back in the swing of it. Now I've been retired for a while, I do miss people quite a bit, you know. I don't communicate as much as I used to, you know. You're the star in your own shop. It's great, as long as you don't abuse it or it goes to your head, you know. You can entertain all day, you know. You can tell jokes, you can be nice, and it's the best day at work, you know. So I definitely recommend it to anyone as a job, but it's got to be a lifestyle, you know. It's not just a 9 to 5, you know. You never stop thinking about tattoos. You never stop thinking about, oh, I know what I can do with next time I do a dragon. I'm going to try and make it, you know, curve the other way, or try making its belly show up more. You should always be thinking of how you can improve yourself, you know, because people come to you, they trust you. Whatever you do on them, even if it's a dot, that's going to be there for life, you know. And if they don't like it, they're going to look at it and remember you and your name the whole time, you know. It's really quite there's no other job like it. Maybe a surgeon. I mean, a hairdresser, you can muck someone's hair up, but it grows back and they've forgotten about it. You know, it's 5 haircuts ago. But if you've got a dodgy tattoo on you, they're going to remember you, all right. But on the other hand, if you do a good one, they'll die for you almost. You know, the loyalty. You know, if anyone mentions anything about the tattoo, is the old fish has got a bit of a crooked head, or something. What? You know, they'd like almost fight you over it. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not crooked. You know, the loyalty you can build up with a customer is fantastic. So if you're lucky enough to have that kind of job and that kind of experience and enjoy it, you know, say not abuse it or anything like that, then I think you're one lucky person. So yeah, I'm almost breaking up here. But yeah, fantastic career it was. Yeah, I'd recommend it to anyone. Just do it properly, like anything. If you can do something, do it properly. Make a name for yourself, you know, because I'd like to know when my last tattoo would disappear, because they're going to be long gone after I'm gone, you know. People who I tattooed who, say 20, you know, 10 years ago, they're going to live to 80. They're going to be around forever, aren't they? So you do make your mark on life. So it's nice to have done your best at it. So yes, I think that's great.